Everyone, please find a seat. We are about to start. And people in the kitchen too, please. Please don't do that. Wow, there's so many of you. So awesome. Find the seats. Yes. Anyways, I'm so happy to see you all here today. We're so excited about the meetup. Today we're mostly going to talk about what matters to the investors in the US. We're having some great panelists here sitting behind of me. But first of all, I would like to have an opening word with Janika Liiv, who is one of the organizers of Refresh Meetup. So big applause to Janika.
Hi. First of all, I would like to say a big thank you for Testlio for organizing such a great warm-up event for Refresh. Big applause to Testlio. And on behalf of the Refresh team, hello to you too. And yeah, wow, there's so many of you. And I hope to see a lot of you also tomorrow at the Refresh. It's going to be really awesome. And those of you who don't have a ticket, unfortunately, we're sold out. But what I can do is to invite you all to our after party tomorrow, which starts 7 p.m. at Kulturikatten, and it's for free for everyone. And invite your friends also, and yeah, let's spend that evening with a big party. So that's it from me, and have a great event. Thanks.
I'm like super nervous because it's my first ever panel discussion that I have to moderate. So I was supposed to look at my mom when I get nervous. So Mom, hi. Awesome. Anyways, let's kick it off. So anyways, if any of you don't know me yet, my name is Kristel Viidik. I just recently got a new name. My previous name was Kristel Viidik, but now I'm Viidik. So I got married with my co-founder Marco. Sits right over there. I really, again, I want to say that many times. I'm super happy to see so many of you here, and hopefully you all will have some interesting ideas to go home with after this meetup. But obviously, be very happy, and just if you have any questions, you will have time to ask questions after I've finished with my question. So I'm going to take like 10 to 15 minutes to respond to your questions from the audience. So today we are going to talk about investors in the US and what really matters to them. And I would like to introduce our amazing panelists. So two of them got here today. They're our investors in Sik Rhee, who is currently a partner in a company called Vertex Ventures. They are an investor in Testlio. Previously, Sik built a company called Loudcloud with Ben Horowitz, and they sold to HP for $1.7 million, right? Yep. Then we have Sten Tamkivi, who is probably very familiar to all of you here in Estonia. Sten was leading a lot of efforts in Skype, and now he is a CEO of a company called Teleport. And he, the relation to investing is that he is an active angel investor, and he was an EIR in Andreessen Horowitz. How many years ago? Like 2 years ago.
2 years.
2 years ago. And then our third panelist is Anthony Lee, who is our second investor in Testlio, and he's an MD or partner at Altos Ventures, and previously he was leading marketing efforts in a company called Evolve Software, and the company went public. Right. Anyway, so first of all, my first question is, what kind of companies do you invest in? Sik, go ahead.
We are investors in mostly enterprise enablement is our thesis. So we do early stage companies in B2B based on our collective backgrounds. Both my partner and I have operating backgrounds and having started companies in enterprise and infrastructure. And so I think companies that we look for are early stage, not particularly seed, but really sort of seed plus to an A. Now I can kind of describe what that means later, but where teams are formed, I think that's really where we look for differentiation, is having a team with a really solid, audacious idea.
Well, I don't think of myself as an investor these days, but
You have a lot of.
I have a few angel investments. So mostly in seed stage, I've mostly invested in founders rather than in companies. So looking for the bright young teams that do cool things. Over the last 2 years, I think it has changed a bit because while I've been working full time on Teleport, then my sort of tunnel vision on human mobility right now. So the only 2 investments I've done over the last 2 years have been very close to that space. So right now I care about making great people move. So, hey, Kristel, mom. Yeah.
And Anthony, what kind of companies do you invest in?
Sure. So we're, in the scheme of Silicon Valley, we're a pretty small group. We're 3 partners, $1 million that we've invested in the last 10 years. And we invest all over the world. So we have a pretty active operation in Asia. It turns out we have like 4 companies here in Central Eastern Europe, 2 of which are run by husband-wife teams. So 50% of our Eastern European companies are run by husband-wife teams. We invest in both business software companies and consumer mobile companies. And we love stuff that's crossing in the middle between mobile and enterprise and consumer, and this idea of, we call it do it for me, but companies that are providing a service, a human service together with software to provide a whole solution to companies. So we have various theses that we pursue from time to time. We're a Series A investor typically. We'd like to lead that first institutional anywhere.
Nice, thank you. Here's my next question. So I know, Sten, that you've been a bit more inactive in investing, but you have a lot of experience like seeing companies getting investment, and especially like during the time when you were in Andreessen. Like, what was my next question here is what was your investment process, and how did you? So what are the factors and criteria for the investment?
Well, I guess what both gentlemen varies widely. It varies from a firm. It varies from the stage of the company, the thesis that the investor is pursuing, the amount of capital they need to deploy in order to make the fund work, and yada yada yada. So there are tons of things. And in that sense, I think there's two extremes. What I've seen are the 2 extremes of that space. Like doing angel investments in Northern Europe is probably one of the sort of the tiny little things all over the place. And then Andreessen Horowitz being one of the top VC firms in the world, $1 billion under management. They have a very rigid process of how these thousands and thousands of people through that building every year. So my role there was I was an EIR, which is entrepreneur residence. So I was still there. I was still there not to invest, but rather to build my own company. So I only got engaged in particular investment deals where I thought that they have some value to add. And other exposure that I had was sitting in pitch meetings and deal reviews where the firm just gave me access to, or argue with them occasionally. I don't think there is such a thing as different. There is no such theme as raising money in the US. It happens to be the place where the venture capital scene is the most developed and the most vibrant, most competitive, and so forth. But I don't think there is anything particularly American about the scene there. Like, especially in Silicon Valley, like every single person you meet probably is not from there. Like, it's rare you meet an American there. And because of that, like, you have all the mix of cultures and the presentation styles and the competition styles and all these things that you might consider when somebody asks you, how do you pitch in America? But I do think there are things that are quite universally valued in that scene, and being authentic, really a passion and a mission that you're on that is really authentic to you, that you're somehow uniquely positioned with your life experiences and ideas to go after that space. The global quest for the top talent, like, are you one or can you attract one? Are the questions that always you hear being argued around. And then there are things that are more related to sort of the external environment and the team. Like, for example, the size of the market, which is, I think, something to point out, that when you go from Estonia, the luxury that we have here is that nobody builds a company for the local market. You know, you can't build a billion-dollar company for 1.2 billion people. Because of that, you have a kind of an international mindset from ground up. And with some US investors, it flies quite well. With others, I've noticed that because of the US domestic market of 350 million people is large enough, that there is much more competence about how do you conquer US rather than how do you conquer 50 different countries. And so these are the things that you might strike as.
What's your investment process in Sik from Vertex Ventures?
So we're a boutique firm. It's just two partners, and we have an admin we share and a receptionist.
Like a startup?
We do most of the work ourselves. The process, so if you look at sort of the three ingredients, there's market, team, and product. The order of kind of the high order bit is the market. The market has its own will and its own force, and it moves at its own pace. Teams that recognize the opportunity to attack an market opportunity that's shifting usually are the ones to capture the most value. And so we sometimes fall in love with teams, but sometimes they're attacking a market that's already mature or not quite. We don't see it kind of realize sort of it being materialized fast enough to be an opportunity. Unfortunately or fortunately, it's almost always the last thing, because your 1.0 is never going to create, the market for you. It's the 3.0 product or the 4.0 product. So every product needs to iterate, and that iteration is how good a team is. So if the team can't iterate, it doesn't matter how good version 1 was. It's just not going to go too far too fast. So we look for those kind of three aspects. And then in terms of doing kind of diligence and deal flow and whatnot, a lot of it is we do conviction-oriented investments, which means one of us, or ideally both of us, have shared conviction with the entrepreneur. And we'll know within first meeting, maybe the second meeting, whether there's something there for us to really get excited about and just sort of say, "Hi, this is really cool." And I don't know if this is going to really work out, but if it does, man, this is going to be awesome. And so that level of excitement. And so first, the entrepreneur has to communicate that excitement to us. So they can't just come and read the pitch deck and be like, don't say. They have to really be passionate. And like when Kristel came and pitched, it was like, okay, she knows what she's like learning, but she's really passionate about this whole area around helping, test and provide quality service to. That passion really has to show through, sort of infectious, and then we kind of glom on things about. Great. That's a really knowledge. Doesn't have to be domain expert, but has empathy with the customer for a fairly big problem. So we look for those kind of things, and when we get sort of that shared conviction, so first of all, we don't look at revenue, we don't look at, we sometimes don't even look at product. So we look at some core IP or some kind of a competitive edge, some moat that you can build, whether it's data or whether it's some very interesting, clever. But a lot of times the winners and losers are actually determined by how you go to market in many cases as well. So so those are kind of the different ingredients we look at, and then once we have conviction, then it's a fairly fluid process, and it's kind of a dating game. We chase entrepreneurs, they chase us, and sometimes we meet in the middle. But the best deals are ones where the conversations just kind of flow naturally with entrepreneurs.
Nice. Anthony?
Kristel, your question is about process, right?
Yeah,
what is our
the
process
and like what makes you the decision on who you're going to invest in.
So how many of you in this room are working with or starting a B2B company? Selling to businesses? All right. Everybody in the front row. They're the ones who are good at funding. So I think the proper answer here I should give is that we are a B2B, we are a B2B business, right? So we are selling a service to entrepreneurs, capital and value-added advice to help build your company. That's our product. And the proper answer should be that, we do content marketing, we generate leads, we have a funnel, we qualify through the funnel, we do diligence, and then we make decisions on the ones, kind of like selling a B2B customer, but in our case, making an investment decision. It's not at all that structured or scientific. It's very much a process of art and gut and feeling. I think for us, when we meet the entrepreneur, we know in that instance if that is a company we want to invest in, and to the extent that we do diligence, it's to confirm our feeling about that gut feeling. We know within the first 5 or 10 minutes. When I met you and Marco in that tiny little office in Austin, I knew this is a company I want to invest in. Maybe not now, almost a year and a half later, right? So it's a very long dating process. Not quite as long as you guys were dating, but so it's a very personal, dynamic process. In our firm, be excited and be a champion and say, I want to do this, and then you have to convince the other partners, and some of them will argue against you. So it's a process not only of the entrepreneur convincing us convincing the entrepreneur, but us also convincing our own partnership. And as an entrepreneur raising money, it's important to understand all those different dynamics in the process of raising money.
Cool. So now, I'm thinking that you've all been sitting on the side of talking to the investors and really trying to raise money. And my next question would be, now that you've been investing for so many years and you've seen companies failed and succeeded, how's your process changed over the past 10 years?
Process in terms of the filter?
Yeah, the filter, exactly. How do you recognize, do you think you recognize companies better, whether they succeed or not?
I'm not sure, because there are companies, you really don't know whether you're a good investor for the first 5-10 years. I mean, it really takes a long time to establish a track record, and many times, there's a lot of luck involved as well. So it's serendipity, not just, you can't really predict the future of outcomes. In many instances, it's the right acquisition from a big strategic, platform vendor that creates this amazing value, but there was no revenue to even justify that. And so, but from an investor perspective, that's really great. So it's a lot of those. But in terms of what was good versus bad signals, I think it has to do with the ability of that founding team, the nucleus, to really not scale phenomenally to hundreds of people, but at least have at least the nucleus of 5 to 15 people that really kind of drove the business forward and is really kind of in a parallel fashion, and worked well as a team, coordinated. I think in those cases, there's always been negative side signals have always been where founders have been have had a difficult time letting go of certain responsibilities or delegating or empowering. And so in those types of scenarios, companies could do well and have a fast start, but then invariably they would stall out, kind of, break through. And from a venture perspective, we really are looking for, the proverbial hockey stick. So you want to sort of see, as the company goes, typically between sort of 30 to like 200 people. That's when you see the growth engine kick in.
Go first, Sten.
Yeah, so I would rather answer it from entrepreneur's perspective.
Yeah, please do.
Like when I started my first company in 1996, venture capital necessarily. There was no angel scene, so there was nothing. So I sort of, my first entrepreneurial experiences were all without external capital. And it was a weird story because I was 18 and my co-founders were something like 20, and we started a company and we didn't know the company. And then 6 months later, we had a corporate acquirer by 49%. So we kind of got like this weird setup where we had an acquisition before we had a business. And that opened many doors, but many of those things, those many doors like the client flow and extra capital and some of those things, they actually led to the demise of the company eventually. So my first company went bankrupt, and I think to a large part because we were over-investing and so being clueless and over-investing actually creates amazing things. But looking back at that, and now I'm running a venture funded company. We thought we raised we had 3 founders, an idea, and a deck, and we raised 2.5 million out of the gate just to build sort of a longer-term vision. And when I look back at my first experience building a bootstrap company, I kind of know what leverage does. Leverage in form of external capital, professional helpers, all that. It can amplify whatever you do a lot, and it amplifies it in both directions. Like you can grow really fast and you can succeed really fast, but you can also screw up at the amplified pace. So this hockey stick that Sik was referring to, it's actually, if you raise a number to, like if you double a number and you build this sort of exponential growth graph, if it goes from 2 to 4 to 8 and so forth, if you start multiplying 0.8, and this, then sort of the diminishing effect happens very quickly as well. So I think this external, getting investors on board, getting high-profile investors on board also raises the bar of the game that you're playing and the expectations that people have for you and the sort of the pressure to succeed and the all these things. So it's not something what anybody should be taking lightly. Like I think in every business, in everything you try to build, you should very carefully navigate and stay honest to yourself. Okay, when do you actually need to raise money? What do you raise that money for? What are the goals? How will that particular investor help you besides just giving you cash? Because I think in some startup circles, especially the less developed ecosystems that you see around Europe, sometimes like the act of raising money in itself gets celebrated. And it's never like the end game. It's just a tool for whatever you want to achieve with the company and the vision. And I think that's a clarity that I've had more over the years. And the other thing that I wanted to add here is when I left Skype, I took a year off, went to Stanford, and part of the thinking that I did at Stanford was like, do I want to become a full-time investor? And the really, really good advice that actually came from the well-known Estonian Steve Jurvetson, who is a full-time investor in Silicon Valley and has done companies like SpaceX and Tesla and so forth. So he told me that when I asked him for advice on that, he told me to Sten, I love being a VC, but you know what? At every single launch party, I'm still a guest. And then that's the moment where I realized that actually I don't want to be a guest still. So I still want to build something. And once you recognize that that's what the difference between the VCs is sitting behind the table and the entrepreneurs, and the VCs who have been entrepreneurs before and crossed to the other side, it's very interesting and important to understand the psychological differences and the incentives, the differences of approaches these people have at that particular stage of life in order to work effectively together.
Thank you. Anthony?
I don't have a whole lot to add. I also raised my first venture round in 1996, and it was sort of like a unstructured world back then. I think there's just so much information available now through panels and events and online. There's a very well-structured process for how to raise money from a seed investor, from a Series A investor. There's a playbook, there's a pitch deck, and you can just copy everything and go. But to Stan's point, most companies should not raise venture capital. Most companies don't need it. Most companies aren't going fast enough for it, and it's not suitable. So I always run into, we work with a lot of seed guys in Canada. We don't do seed investments ourselves. And most of these companies I need are really not suitable for venture capital or even seed capital. They are almost like lifestyle businesses.
Or Sik Rhee, Canada.
Yeah. That's another northern country, my country. So, that's the first most important question you ask yourself. Venture capital comes with a lot of headache, as you know.
Yes.
Right? You have a new boss. You have a few new bosses now. There's different reports you have to do. Yeah, board decks, numbers in it, right? So it's a whole different life that you're signing up for, and it's a very long relationship too.
Yep, a bigger pressure.
Yeah, I mean, investors look at risk-adjusted returns, and so what that means is, you guys play poker, play hold'em. You don't bet everything when you see your first two cards because you got 7. And eventually, you want to get to see what your opportunity for winning is. So what you do is you bet the ante, and then you bet a little more, you bet a little more. So how investors treat sort of the companies we invest in some cases, we're investing for the next flip of the card. So you have to really have a clear milestone for what that next flip is going to prove before you raise any money. So, it's not about like how fast you can grow. Like almost every company that tells me they're going to be cash flow positive with this round of financing never makes it there, right? Well, they're already cash flow positive when that, right? So I think, but every time that the entrepreneurs look at it, it's really about reducing risk for the next milestone. And most of the established VCs are mature enough to recognize that we don't expect you to be profitable with our check. We don't sometimes expect you to even have revenue. But as long as you can convince us that the opportunity is big enough over time, and then you can sort of address, and overcome these risk hurdles, then we can go ahead and make small investments up front, and then go ahead and add on to it. Most mature companies, by the time they get to IPO, are going to do Series E, F, plus and minus. So you're going to go through sort of 4 or 5 successive rounds of this endeavor. And by the way, as CEOs, you never ever stop fundraising. So you're always going to have a dialogue with those investors, even if they didn't invest. They might be around for the next tranche or the next round or the next round or the next round. So, meaningfully important company in the tech ecosystem, you're still going to have to raise somewhere between, call it $40, $50 million to $200 million over the life of that company.
Big goals. Yep, but so after you made the decision to actually invest in a company, like, what are your expectations to a CEO usually? Anthony, can you answer that?
Or the CEO specifically?
Or the CEO specifically.
Yep. Yes. Well,
how many CEOs do we have here in the audience, by the way, or founders? Quite a lot. Cool.
Yeah. You get to wear the gold shoes. So I would say there are certain things that we've learned to look for in CEOs, certain traits that we like to see. So I'm not quite answering your question, but before we invest, the kind of things we're looking for are people who have a very clear and compelling vision of what the future looks like and want to be part of getting there with their company. They are people who we call systems thinkers. They can envision this whole system that their company is a part of and how to build that and staff it up and get from here to there and all the processes around that. This company is very systems and operations heavy. We love people who are just voracious learners. They're like the Borg in Star Trek. You're always learning, absorbing other people's brains, getting smarter and smarter. Then after we invest, the most important thing that we look for is objectivity. And that's kind of a weird thing to say because you want passion and you want drive and you want aggressiveness and you want people to succeed. But For us, the most important thing is that the CEOs remain objective. So they can be passionate about their mission and their vision and their idea, but on a day-to-day basis, they have to look at what's going on in the world, look at what's going on in their business, and be very honest about where they're falling short and where they're succeeding. Communicate that to the board and have a plan for how to close those gaps. So I would say objectivity, as a weird word as that is the number one thing that we look for.
So then, as a CEO of a company, what are the expectations to yourself?
So basically, I think what many first-time founders don't realize is that the default state of the startup is dying. So what I do every day, and actually our colleague Ben's quote on that, is that as a CEO, you sleep like a baby. You wake up every 3 hours and cry. And that's kind of the delay between cries varies depending on if you just closed the round and you just hired a good person and so forth, or if you're running out the runway and you lost the person who got it. So there's variation to that, but basically you're in this. You raise money for 2 years, you're up for two years of constant panic, like you admit it or not. And basically the entire process of building a startup is de-risking it. You try to close every single week with some risk that was there, some unknown that you know have an answer for. You know that it is screwed up, or you know that it's actually going to be fine, and you can move on to the next one. And so there's this cycle. And the fun thing with all of that is that at the same time, to the external world and the team, you need to look super optimistic, pumped up, give amazing media interviews and all that. And nobody cares if you didn't sleep or cried last night, right? And so it's a fun pre-suicidal state that I can highly recommend to anybody. So I guess to bridge with the investors topic, I think the best investors to work for, and I've always admired working with and observing investors that have been in that role themselves, because there's so much more empathy towards the situation. And if you like venture capital, I've heard about pre my days, or before I had the first time I lived in Silicon Valley was in the 90s, but I was in high school, so I didn't really meet these people. But so probably the VC scene in the 80s was like ex-bankers, and it was much more of a financial industry, and you could do like a hedge fund, or you could go into VC, and there's kind of different forms of deploying capital. And now when you look at VC industry, especially in Silicon Valley, but increasingly in Europe, you see ex-operators, people who survive building companies themselves, and that's that empathy to that role of being the CEO and being a founder, I think is a super important part of making this relationship work.
Thank you. And Sik, what are your expectations to companies, CEO?
I mean, there's not expectation. The role that we play is a support role, so we're there to sort of be cheerleaders and to really make sure we encourage CEOs to be executors and make decisions and sort of mistakes are fine and they're tolerable and they're expected. The thing that we look for the most is people's ability to prioritize at all times and really understand what and why the order of things should be tackled in such a fashion, whether it's hiring or whether it's investing in marketing dollars or sales engines on that. If you don't do the right level of prioritization, you can end up making very costly mistakes that are harder to recover from. And as I said before, like not much of it actually has much to do with products. At that stage, it has to do with about disrupting an ecosystem like Testlio. So a lot of this is I look at it like a mousetrap, and companies building this gigantic mousetrap and running its sort of tests and scenarios through all the customers and markets and whatnot, and you're tweaking it constantly so that the job of the board and the investor is just to encourage the experimentation around that, because it's never going to be perfect from the get-go. And great teams are always good and adept at what needs to be done next. And every CEO has 100 things on their to-do list, of which they can really properly address 5. And I'm of the mindset I'd rather you nail the 5 and move on to the next, as opposed to try to do 20 and kind of do a mediocre job at the 20. And so it's constant prioritization, sharpening of that sort of critical thinking around what is the next thing now, as opposed to what could wait 3 weeks.
So here's my next question. Why companies fail the most? What's the number one reason why companies fail? I think a lot of people would like to know, what makes us mess everything up the most.
There is no easy answer for that. And
have you had any? Can you give us any examples of any of your bad investments in the history?
He doesn't have any.
Yeah, I mean, plenty of bad outcomes and losses. One particular thing I remember was the market didn't actually materialize. If you want to, so if you look at it, investment discipline, there's sort of, once you know there's a market, by the way, everybody else also knows there's a market, then there are 30, 40 competitors, and you might get there and you might have a modest outcome, but the biggest outcome comes when you actually help create markets. So when the market doesn't actually exist, and this is what I did as an entrepreneur, is you try to envision how things should be within the next 3-4 years, and then you try to create and justify why a company needs to be built to service a market that isn't there. So it takes a certain amount of crazy on the part of founders and a lot of conviction and willingness to play along on the part of investors. But when those type dynamics actually hit, you can build phenomenal, big, multi-billion-dollar enterprises. So in those types of swing for the fences bets, you may have the best team, you may have amazing execution, great product, great, just everything across the board. A CEO just does everything properly, yet still fail. And so that's happened before to me, and that's really the most unfortunate part, because you can look around the table and be like, oh, we had amazing people contributing, working their butts off, but the market just didn't come.
Sten, have you seen any bad cases or stuff gone wrong?
A very nuanced one, I think, is a forced exit, where on paper it worked out, but the product and the vision dies in 12 months. Which is probably from the founder's perspective, it's one of the most tragic ones. A recent example that the entire internet is on their back feet about the Sunrise. And I was a seed investor in Sunrise, the calendar app. And just looking at Pierre, the founder, Microsoft bought him for $100 million. And now last week you had tens of thousands of tweets complaining about that there is no replacement and Microsoft is shutting it down. And if you are the founder who sort of created a vision that you want to fix this sort of calendar issue for the world, no matter if you made some money out of it, but you still probably feel kind of empty. So I think that's obviously there are much simpler failures of running out of time, running out of money, running out of the market is materialized, all these other things. But what the point I'm trying to make is that sometimes the failures are much more nuanced than they look on the surface. Sometimes even the very shiny stories have their own failures behind them. But flipping the question around is why do startups succeed? I think, which is a question that helps you understand this as well. I think 4 or 5 years ago, I think the Google Ventures guys pulled a few data scientists from the Google's core search team, and said that, okay, here's all the data we have of all the startup investments ever made, and all the demographics of all the CEOs and founders and their employees, and all this sort of market dynamics, which schools they went to, blah, 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 blah. But here's the data set, tell us why. And they came back crunching this data and said that, yep, we found one thing that actually has statistical significance in the regression analysis, and this was timing, which is the most useless knowledge ever in making the next investment. I think, but it's kind of close to true. Right? So you can have I don't know, Skype came around 2003. The first time I made a call on the internet was 1993, and it was awful. It was you had to set it up and configure the ports and proxies and all these things, and then you're online and it shows connected, and then you realize there's nobody to talk to. It's like being the first guy with a fax machine. And so it takes like 10 years and somebody else comes and solves this problems like getting online easy and searching for people and bam, all of a sudden you have like 40% of international calling minutes going through that thing. And there is like people looking from outside, probably in those 10 years to identify 50 teams that do everything right, but there was one that actually did it the right way.
Anthony?
You know,
Talking about succeeding and failing.
Well, there's really only one reason why startups fail. They run out of money, right? Very few situations you have people with money who give up. I can't think of very many, right? There are some, and they give the money back, whatever's left, but very few situations like that. So there's only two reasons why you run out of money, and they both have to do with timing. One is that you are too early to the market, right? The market doesn't materialize. There's no product market fit. There's a lot of ways to call that. My third company was a social bookmarking company that was launched in 2000. We had the best team. We had Greylock. We had Lightspeed, great investors, and it was just like 8-9 years too early. The concept was just not ready for people. 10 years later, Delicious and other things build companies around that. So you're too early. The second way to run out of money is sometimes inflicted by investors, right? So you talk about like sometimes investors can accelerate your demise, and the thing that venture-funded companies are most guilty of sometimes is something called premature scaling, or PMS. And premature scaling is when you think that, when investors think that, hey, the model is working, we put $10 million into a company, let's go build that sales force, let's go just hire people and let's go for it. And maybe the model is not quite there yet, and you just fall on your feet. And that's another very common way to run out of money. And I've seen it over and over again. So running out of money is really the only reason startups fail, and it has to do with timing either way.
Thank you. So, do we have any questions from the audience? Ragnar.
So I will start with the question that, give me an example when you as a VC have stepped in as CEO. Why this happened and do you believe it worked? I don't ask from him because Horowitz said clearly, founder has to be CEO. What is your view? Like when VC have to step in as CEO, have you done that in your portfolio companies?
With the seed company, I had that discussion with the CEO who was highly technical. In fact, wrote all the code, and then at some point it becomes a question of priorities and where do you really want to spend your time and how do you want to sort of scale the company at the same time. So it's never something you want to force. It's always a set of conversations, and entrepreneurs will sometimes recognize, hey, that they're an owner of the company as much as they are an employee. So are you able to, if you wear the owner hat, would the company be in a better position to succeed if somebody else is actually making the calls as the CEO, while they still play an integral role? Now, in terms of completely replacing and sort of letting the person go, haven't gone through that, because we wouldn't make an investment thinking we're going to swap out a CEO. That would just be a non-starter.
So in our history, we have replaced maybe 15% of the CEOs, 20% in our companies. And it used to be more common than it is now. We've really come around to this belief that we like founder, owner CEOs rather than hired gun CEOs who don't have that ownership mentality. So now our rate of CEO, letting go CEOs is probably less than 5%. We go into an investment with the mindset that this person can run this company for the next 10 plus years. For Testlio, my job is to make Kristel successful, right? And if I have to fire her, then I'm still stuck with her husband. So it's even more complicated. So it's for us, it's very important to try to find a founder that we believe can go all the way.
And just add on to the two CEOs, can you share the biggest lesson, especially Kristel, because you have been your first time basically even manager. So what is the biggest lesson that you learned as a CEO? Because it's often also, and Sten, you as well, like, can you share some lessons to other folks?
Well, I think the most important thing is to have the mentality to never give up. I think that's the most important thing that I've learned over. Like I've cried a lot as well. Like I woke up in the middle of the night to just cry because being a startup CEO in a fast-growing company and giving a job to so many people, it's a lot of pressure, right? And so, but I think the most important thing is to see an opportunity in every problem and just not give up, never give up.
I think one thing that is my recent learning, or something that I had to adjust to, because when I left Skype, it was already so large that you have these organizations of people to rely on. It might still be a culture as a startup, but many of you who might come from a 100-person company and then you think you start your own thing, it's just amazing the shitload of stuff that falls on you. Like that will not happen unless you do it. Because you want your engineers to write the code and you want to have your marketing person do the marketing. And so anything else that sort of distracts them is your job. So it's like you're sort of crawling up from this sort of like pool of, these pools with colorful balls, like you just trying to get out of that one. And only later, when you have a business, then you can hire people to do all those things. So that's I think where the 6 points about prioritization comes so heavily. Is that you always have 100 things you could spend your day on. That's what is the one that you actually need to do, and which of the other ones you let go. And it took a while, like even managing your own calendar or finding the best airline tickets all of a sudden becomes like an hour-long thing that you previously were picking somebody who deals with that stuff.
Yeah. So we had a question from here. Go ahead.
So to continue on that point, what would you say for someone who's a CEO and the companies startup companies develop extremely fast, so does the CEO. I mean, she or he has to, if he wants to continue running it, or make sense for him to run it. So what would you say a CEO who has not been previously a CEO, does not have a startup experience or background, and it's his first? How do you continue developing yourself so you can be an accelerator to the company rather than a handbrake because of your lack of knowledge or experience?
So one of our most successful CEOs had never done anything before. I think he was like a magazine editor or something like that. He dropped out of college. In 2010, one of his friends convinced him to start a Groupon club in Asia. His first question was, what is Groupon? And so he was one of these voracious learners that I talked about earlier. He was always learning and very curious. And so he left school, he left Harvard in 2010, moved to Seoul, Korea, and started one of 200 Groupon clubs. And then as the company got bigger, his advisor said, oh, you should implement Salesforce. What's Salesforce? He had never heard of any of these things, had never been in the tech scene, had never started a company, had never run anything. And yet he built a company in 6 years that is now worth $5 billion. And he himself is a billionaire now. So, you see these amazing cases, like the best companies, the best tech companies in the world were run by founders, right? If you look across the history of technology, the founders took them all the way to very big. And most of those were first-time founders. So those are very special people that you have to find. That's part of the secret sauce of our job, is to find that special spark. Very different from looking at people who've done it before.
Yeah, I mean, I've been a founder twice, never a CEO, never wanted the job, never craved it. So when Ben was CEO, I was the founder with him, and I got to watch him kind of grow. It was my second company actually, and he was the first-time CEO. And we made a lot of mistakes, but the thing about I think a couple of things that helped. We had a very supportive board. One, he also had a very great mentor, and I always recommend mentors for CEOs. Since in his case, he has Bill Campbell, so you can actually ask for a better one. And having a sounding board to really air out your chief concerns, and someone who's really kind of 100% by your side. I mean, that's really important. And unfortunately, investors can't play that role 100% of the time. We try to be as supportive as we can, but we also have a fiduciary responsibility and objectivity around certain, so that's sort of there's certain scenarios where that doesn't always become the case. And so the transparency, what you're looking for is 100% transparent conversation with, even to the point of like, oh my God, my board members are driving me nuts, or like, how do I go get the next investor, blah, blah, blah. You may not necessarily tell that to your current investors, right? But if you have a true mentor or someone you can fall back on, that really helps give you the confidence to push forward. So, so I think that, I've seen that with Ben, where he just really grew and became much stronger as time went on. But nobody starts out being a great CEO.
Yep. So I think let's take 2 more questions, and then we have to finish up.
How do you feel that the non-CEOs lead the fundraising cost company?
Never a good idea.
Why?
Because the CEO is the person we manage as a board.
Sorry, what was the question?
How do you feel about non-CEOs doing the fundraising? Yeah. I mean, there could be someone, at fundraising, but
Founders.
Still founders, yeah. But the CEO, I actually just saw a deal the other day where they literally had a new CEO they hired, and he still came to the meeting. Our founder drove most of the discussion, but and we determined the CEO was more than a puppet. Otherwise, we would never invested. Well, we didn't invest anyway, but like that's different. We wanted to invest in that one.
Yeah, absolutely not. I mean, my question would be, what more important is the CEO doing at that moment, right? The CEO's job is to get money, get people, and make it happen. So if the CEO is not the one doing the fundraising, especially in the early days of a company, when companies are very much later stage, sometimes the CFO will lead those fundraisings, but that's when they're beyond 50, 100 million in revenue. We are investing in that CEO. That's half of our investment thesis is the person.
Maybe a good thought about the product market fit to avoid this premature scaling that you were talking about. Like, when are you happy about product market fit? When you think to the product?
That's always something we're trying to figure out, and there are some signals that we're learning that to look for. One of the signals is that you feel some pull from the marketplace, and the way you can see that pull is by inbound organic leads. So people are starting to find you on their own instead of you advertising or you going out to find them. So if we can measure the volume of inbound organic leads are growing, and we see, hey, people are looking for this stuff that we have to sell. Most companies, when they start out, people don't know they need what they're selling. And so when we see that happening, we feel like that's one of the signals that we look for.
One more question. Finish up. All right, go ahead.
If you're a technical founder, then what qualities should you look for when looking at a co-founder, or should you look for a co-founder at all? Not necessarily. I've actually backed a solo technical founder. Do you look for a co-founder? You eventually have to recruit people to work for you. So you should always be recruiting. So I consider founders to be not just the people you start at day zero with, but you will pick up a sort of co-founder class people along the way that may be the journey. And many times the technical founder will along into a product or a concept or a prototype even before recruiting. I mean, Jan Zoom was a perfect example. Jan built all of WhatsApp and launched it all by himself. He did not have a co-founder, and he basically assembled the team around him. And maybe you could be a co-founder, but a founder can just will it, push it through. It's extremely rare, however.
And I think it boils down to a lot on other personality traits. So the fact that if you're technical or not doesn't matter that much. Like I know, for example, about myself that I can't operate solo. Like what was mentioned here about mentors, that you have a sounding board. Like I need somebody across the desk. I need somebody to bounce ideas off, and a lot of these ideas materialize and the decisions materialize through dialogue. All that sort of dialogue, you can have that dialogue with an early employee, but then again, like the more aligned your incentives are with that person, the more you're in the same boat, the more sense the decisions make, and you know that they're coming from the similar place. So when I was studying Calgary, I did quite a lot of thinking around that, and obviously there are several things why if you want a partner, like what are the qualities that you lack, you're probably filling your own gaps, so you're trying to fill those, that all makes sense. But there's also a lot of sort of very mechanical things that you need to figure out. How do you split the founding shares? Like how do you like there's a like thanks to that decision. And he's a weird guy indeed. Like he turned me down. Yeah, I used to work for my first company, and he's still doing the company. He's weird. And he probably, because of that solo founding act, he probably share of $19 billion, right? So if he had a co-founder, he probably took 40% less, or 80% less, or who knows? So it's like that sort of practical things are on the bottom of the list for me, but they do exist. And one thing that I found super useful, which is a book by Noam Wasserman, has crunched data on about 10,000 or 12,000 startups and taken a data-driven look at these things. And so they tracked, like, okay, 2 founder companies versus 3 founder companies. How did they split? How did they perform later? Does it have an impact on exits and all that stuff? So Founders Dilemmas, I think, is the book. So look it up, lots of good data sets.
I think the data in there says that having co-founders does correlate more highly to success, but there are obviously success cases for single or multiple founders.
I think his bottom line there was that it didn't matter that much about how many co-founders, but what mattered was that people who optimized for the size of the pie are eventually more successful than the ones that are optimizing for the size of the slice.
Yeah. Don't marry your co-founder.
Yeah, right.
No, don't listen to me.
That's the other thing that CEOs do.
Right. No one not to listen to your board.
Yeah, exactly. But anyways, so I think I think there are a lot of different factors that are gonna lead a company to success. Just to name a few, you need to have an international mindset, great team, great product, good timing, and you need to be able to prioritize well. So thank you, Sik, Sten, and Anthony for being in the panel. And Mom, I hope I did well.
Yeah.
All right. There are some. I think there's still some snacks left and beer, and so yeah, let's eat and mingle and thank you.
See you tomorrow.
Let's see you. See you tomorrow. Yeah, it's refreshing.
All right.